I am Dibyasom Puhan. Some time ago, I wrote down something that I wanted to talk about and sort of going to refer to it while we talk. So this is not sort of a motivation speech, I guess. Probably just wanted to share like 10 minutes about myself, what I have been doing. The very hidden engine that probably keeps me driving from uh, probably in standard third when I first started coding to eventually co-founding a startup in the fintech sector that potentially, as of today, we're probably youngest in the very space that we're working in, but our only competitors today are sort of multi-billion dollar companies. I'll come to that more about later. But to get started, this is in very short a story about passion, flow, and I think more importantly audacity. So first of all, the first spark. So when I was in my third grade, it was probably the first time that I started coding. Primarily because my mom used to teach computer science in the very school that I was learning. So that was the first time I got introduced to how to code. I think that was an unfair advantage when I first went out, started coding. By probably a year or a two, I was halfway through learning the. I'm not sure if how and when you started learning programming, but there used to be a language or a programming language or a code, something not probably what we use today. It's called Logo. Any chances anyone has heard about it? Pretty old language. What it lets you do is you essentially can draw a lot of patterns. That's about it. So the patterns can be interesting, the patterns can be less interesting, but sort of lets you figure out how you can convert programming language into patterns. Lot of ways to interpolate that, but that's how probably my journey started. Year and a half ago, year and a half doing that, I realized that this is interesting, but there is definitely more to it. So that's how my journey started. That was one little unfair advantage, but definitely when I started off, I sort of was very sure that there is more to it than what it eventually first feels like. If you want to kind of relate on what that feeling feels like is watching a crime thriller, knowing that you're being shown some kind of an evidence, you're able to figure out what the plot is going to be, just don't know what it's going to be right away. That's the kind of feeling I used to have when I was in my standard 3 or 4, when I was doing the most basic of what computer science could be. Knowing that there could be something better, I just didn't know how it would fold out. Few years down the line, by standard 6, I had probably done enough of code that would. I never realized at that point, but that was something that actually helped me never have to learn coding again until I was in my third or fourth year. I mean, most of those things were done. The first event that happened, which sort of made me understand what I could be doing and what actually drives me, what was my first hackathon. If you guys are not aware about it, a hackathon is essentially a competition, but where you're coding. The only difference is that a lot of you might have some kind of hobby project. For example, a hobby can be gardening, a hobby can be making your own resume better, which never happens, honestly. We don't get the time to it until you feel like you want to apply for that new job, or you have a fight with your boss, start preparing a new resume. But one of my hobbies was essentially, I think at that point of time, figuring out what new could be done. And a difference between typical competition versus a hackathon is that while usually you're not driven, a hackathon is more condensed. It's like 24 hours of just sprinting into it, compressing into it, and building something that makes sense, right? Different than hackathon, there is more drive to it. And eventually, in standard 7, I think at that point of time I was in my standard 7. This was my first hackathon that I participated in. Standard 7 versus a lot of college graduates, first year, second year, sophomores. I came in second in that hackathon. I was extremely excited, but that was one very clear realization to myself that the world is not Alexandria, like it's not invincible. So it does bend if you have an idea, if you have passion in your heart to carry it. And I think that's something that pushed me a lot. Down the line, once school basically once school and the stat board exams were over, my parents never really forced me to sort of go into NITs, IITs. I was never really into anything other than coding, to be honest, or mathematics, to be honest. And more importantly, honestly, my parents just wanted to make sure that I'm happy wherever I am. Probably make a few friends more than I used to have in school, and not being something called prestige chained, like not particularly from an NIT or IIT. So at that point of time, I took a guess. I figured out what was the most interesting thing to chase. At that point of time, it happened to be artificial intelligence. Now this is about 2019 when AI was really new, not had been introduced at a scale at which it is a hype today. I think that is when I got introduced to colleges. And to be very honest, my first year at college was more or less like watching a YouTube video at 0.25x speed, extremely slow. Wanted to do it better, faster, itch to do something new, but it never really happened. So that is when I started exploring outside, started doing, trying out newer things. One of the first things that it led into was essentially working on a product course, Kiddo. So it's a little startup based out of France in a very outskirt village called Pepinan. I should not be saying the N because in French there is no word N pronunciation, but whatever, right? So if you guys don't understand co-parenting, it's essentially, let's say there's a couple, they had a kid and then they went through a divorce. That process of raising a kid while being divorced is called co-parenting. So in India, there are not a very set of heavy, huge, strict rules, but in France, it's way more complicated than that. Like, for instance, in India, there's a custody that happens. Either the kid stays with the mom or the dad. In France, there are 51 different ways that it could be different. So there's something called 2-2-5-5. 2 days with the dad, 2 days with the mom, 5 and 5. And there are 51 such combinations and permutations, and it's all mandated by the court. So it gets extremely difficult. While we think that France really looks nice, castle-like looking monuments everywhere around, famous for, of course, French food and wine. What it really is not very good at is digitalization. So UPI today is the most advanced form of payment that we have in the entire world, to be honest. In France, there is nothing like that. So again, for co-parents, it was extremely difficult to be able to manage, sharing of money management, taking care of custodies, so on and so forth. So that was the idea of Kiddo. It was built on a very interesting concept of finance called open banking. It's not yet introduced in India. It's considered open banking as 50% of what UPI does, but at a global scale. So in India, it has not been, it has been very underutilized because of course we have better infra, we have better tech, we have UPI. In the world around, in Europe especially, I think open banking is what drives a lot of innovation. It essentially lets you speak a language that every bank in the world understands. You can develop an application, you can make a product that actually can talk to make international payments, so on and so forth. Probably something I could talk a lot about. I'll jump to the next thing. Eventually, this particular startup, it was a startup. While it was a startup, I really enjoyed it. So what I'm trying to tell you through this entire story is the process of developing that patience, not jumping around as soon as something becomes less interesting. That was a lot me, I think, jumping into a new thing every 6 months, doing something new probably every 6 or 8 months, less than that, to be very honest. Faster than a semester would change, I would have already jumped into something new. So Kiddo was my first startup. After that, I joined there as an intern. I was still in my first year. In the next 10 months, by the time I dropped out of it or moved out of it because it was getting institutionalized, new routes, new processes, things that could be hacked into, done in a matter of days or weeks, turned into processes and compliances and approvals of weeks, if not less than that. So eventually, again, it became boring because you want things faster, faster than the pace at which it is already happening. So then I came back to India, always after the next big thing that he could solve. For example, if he's on the road, randomly having a conversation with anyone and he finds the idea interesting, the next thing he does is hand over his card and ask him to meet for coffee at his very office. So that was the kind of guy he was, looking for a problem to solve in every particular section. That particularly drives me a lot. My inspiration from fintech sort of came from there. That's when we sort of co-founded, or I joined there as the head of AI innovation. Became co-founder. Became one of the co-founders once we raised some external funds. What we do there is very different from what I've ever done in any startup. For example, you see products coming up at Shark Tanks, you see new startups coming up at XYZ different ventures. Probably here, startup has been in a boom lately at a lot of different places. And if you see the pattern to it, every time there's an idea, then there is an MVP, a minimum viable product around it, people around it, business around it, and it becomes a product eventually, with some kind of revenue, of course. But every product starts from a very little journey, from almost nothing. Eventually, over a period of a year or a two, about 5 years, it reaches the kind of scale where it actually makes money for the company. This is what was fundamentally different at Plutus. I finally got to see what is called consumer scale. So, for instance, what we do at Plutus is we work with NPCI, the National Payment Corporation of India. It's the company that created UPI, RuPay cards that we use, all those kind of things. So they've created a very interesting thing called BBPS, Bharat Bill Payment System, or Bharat Connect. So anytime you pay your bills from applications like Google Pay, Paytm, PhonePe, whatever application you're paying, let's say you're paying your electricity bill, credit card, any kind of bill that you can possibly imagine, it goes through the centralized system. So that's what we are into, and it's an extremely interesting but a very niche product on tech piece to be talking about. Won't jump much into it, but my entire point here being that I think over the period of last year and a half, possibly mentoring students, educating students, building products. A lot of times what eventually happens is, for instance, you jump into a startup building a product, arguments happen, disagreements happen, and we eventually decide to part ways or probably find the next career switch. I just wanted to paint my picture into that somehow over a period of time, one needs to learn resilience, patience, and most importantly, it's something that you call direction. So I think that was mostly what I wanted to cover about. Could not find a lot of time to sort of paint it into a sense that we could talk more, but yeah, that's all.